please enter them in the chat, and Dan or Andrew will answer those questions when it fits in. It's really a great pleasure to have two such experts on renewable energy to present for our local group and the community here. Andrew Valenis is the Executive Director of the Montana Renewable Energy Association, and he's been in that position since 2016, and if you look at his resume, he's really an expert on wind energy and all kinds of renewable energy. He's had experience in all these different areas, and is also somebody who appreciates the outdoors and doesn't want to ruin it by having climate change. And so he's going to talk first, and he's going to cover micro scale wind and water hydro projects. And then after him, we have a local guy, Dan Brandborg, who many of you know. In fact, many of you may have had a project installed by him and his co-workers. Dan has been working in the solar field since 1983. He's done over 200 projects. He's an expert at all different levels of solar projects, from siting, costing, batteries, all these different things. Besides that, he's a pilot, and he is in the Bitterroot Backcountry Horsemen and is an expert mule rider. In fact, so he's both of these guys are experts in renewable energy and outdoors people, and I think that fits in very well with our community, and I'm really excited to hear them talk. Andrew's going to be first, and then Dan will talk, and we'll hope for a lot of time for questions, because I think people are interested in this topic. Okay. Go ahead, Andrew.
Great. Well, thanks, Kit, and thanks everybody for joining us tonight. We've got a great group of individuals. Excited to see everyone joining us on a beautiful spring evening. So I'm going to go ahead and just dive right in, because I do have a number of slides that I want to make sure that we get to. So let me share my screen and make sure that comes through okay. Kit, Dan, or somebody, can you give me a thumbs up? Make sure you can see the screen. Oh, I got 3 thumbs up. That's great. Okay. So again, my name is Andrew Valenis. I'm the Executive Director of the Montana Renewable Energy Association. We're a nonprofit founded back in 2001, and our mission is to foster the growth of renewable energy for all Montanans through education, advocacy, and industry engagement. And what that means is that we do a lot of work with the installation businesses around Montana who are putting in solar and wind and microhydro and heat pumps and geothermal and all that stuff. We're one of the only advocacy groups in the state that works directly with them to try and kind of help grow markets and make sure that they're operating in a healthy way. So we're not a trade association, but we do have a lot of installation businesses that are members of ours. Our education and outreach work, I do a lot of presentations around the state, including ones like these. We also have annual events in Missoula, Helena, and our big regional annual Montana Clean Energy Fair that travels around the state. So we do a lot of events like that. And really, we just try to engage Montanans and help them learn about renewable energy and help facilitate any questions that they may have. And then in a very contemporary way, with what's going on in Helena right now, which is where I'm zooming in from, is our legislative and regulatory advocacy. So I lobby at the state legislature. I also work before the Public Service Commission, trying to protect and advance renewable energy policies and regulations throughout the state. Really quickly, I really like going over basics before we talk about solar and wind and these technologies. So just the difference between power and energy. Power is measured in watts. It's how much work something does. And energy is simply a measure of how much power we're using over a certain time period. And it's measured in watt hours. If you take power times time, you get energy. And that works for both energy use and energy production. So we can talk about producing energy from solar with the same equation. We can talk about using energy in the home. Just some kind of examples here. You know, you heat up your dinner, you can use maybe a not many kilowatt hours at all, maybe about 60 watt hours. Watching a football game, maybe 200 or so, and then solar production, again, it's a similar formula. And the important thing here is just when we talk about renewable energy, we talk a lot about kilowatts and kilowatt hours. And the important thing to remember is that kilowatts is how big your system is, how big it was installed. And kilowatt hours is how much actual energy production you're getting. So that's the only math for the night, I promise. I also want to talk about Montana's resources and what we have available, especially in Missoula, which gets cloudy, where I live, down the Bitterroot, where it can get a little cloudy. People always say and ask, you know, is Montana a good place for solar? And the answers are resounding yes. What you see here, you don't see much difference in the solar resource across the state. But if you look at it compared nationally, we actually have a pretty good solar resource compared to a lot of states in the country. And it's actually better than a lot of states in the country. Now, you know, we're not going to get the same production that you would in Arizona or New Mexico or Southern California, but it does compare to some really well to other states that have really big solar markets. Places like, actually ours is better than Minnesota, which has a big solar market. Ours is about the same or better than most of Florida, a lot of the Southeast, a lot of the East Coast, you know, and there are really big solar markets there. So we do have a really good solar resource on an annual cycle. Of course, our short winter days are a little challenging, but we make up for it over the summer. And what about our wind resource? Again, in Western Montana, coming off or being in the Rockies a little more, we get a little less wind than in the central and eastern part of the state, but that doesn't mean that we have a bad wind resource. We do still have a relatively good wind resource, obviously kind of the Bitterroot area circled there. So, you know, wind is certainly an option. And just like with solar, you can kind of measure it first and then decide, you know, if it makes sense to invest in that system for your energy needs. Okay, so those are some basics, and I moved through those really quickly. But here's what I wanted to get to. When you're thinking about going solar, or you know, installing wind or micro hydro or whatever it is, there's kind of the same steps that you want to go through. The first thing you want to do is gather information, and so attending a presentation like this is a great thing to do. And you can also visit, of course, MREA's website. I'll share more about that later. We have tons of information on there to help you, including a one-pager that actually walks you through these steps in a little more detail. But the first thing you want to do is start thinking about location. You want to start thinking about, are you going to be on-grid or off-grid? Start thinking about what your budget's going to be. You know, how much are you willing to spend, you know, before or after any kind of financing or tax credits. And the reason it's good to think about these questions is because, as Dan will probably tell you, this is some of the first questions that installers are going to ask you. And so it's good to start thinking about that now, kind of before you get to that conversation, so you can have some good answers. The next thing you want to do is just contact some local installers. So Dan obviously is a local installer. I'll throw a plug out for MREA's installer directory. We have a whole directory of installers that you can find from around the state. So if you're looking for one there, you know, it's a good resource for you. And then you'll start reviewing costs and financing information with your installer. So, you know, they'll look at the system, they'll look at your energy needs, figure out what you want to purchase, what you can purchase, and review all the costs and financing. And that includes tax credits and any loans that you might consider. And I'll talk about some of those later on. After that, you sign a contract, which is exciting because then your project's moving forward, and you can start looking at the installation. So there's a bunch of paperwork that has to happen first. Your installers are experts at all that stuff. They know how to help you work through it all. They do it all the time. And of course, your installation will depend on, you know, the weather, the installer schedule, the paperwork, of course, like I mentioned, your inspection schedule. You know, you have to get permits to make sure you connect everything safely. Things like that. So all of that will kind of influence how quickly your installation can happen. And then once it's inspected, you're ready to start producing your own energy, and you flip the switch and all of a sudden your energy bills start to go down and you're producing your own energy. It's really exciting, which is great. So like I mentioned, there's a handout that we have, actually a one-pager on that installer directory page, actually at the right before that little map that you'll see there. And you can download the PDF. It actually walks you through all of this, like I said, in a little more detail. So I'd recommend people check that out on our website. A couple of considerations for siting. I'm going to mostly skip over solar because I think Dan's going to talk about that stuff. But just a little bit about wind. You know, you want to be careful with wind. It's going to have to be a tall structure because turbulence from things in the ground or near the ground are going to impact your wind resource, and effectively it slows down the wind and then you get less power. So you're looking at a minimum of about 30 feet ideally, and locating it away from trees, structures, you know, your house, things like that. But wind can be really effective energy resource. But you know, it's not quite as easy maybe to site as solar, just because the wind doesn't necessarily blow everywhere, whereas the sun shines everywhere. Again, I'm going to skip over solar stuff here. Dan can talk about solar. Sorry, I just left that in that's kind of my typical slide deck here. But a little bit more about wind. So this is an example of a small wind turbine. So it's rated at 160 watts at 28 miles per hour. And you'll see that a lot with small wind, is that it'll give you a capacity, a rated capacity based on a wind speed. And the reason is the wind turbines, the way they generate power is by spinning a turbine in internal, you know, the blade spins and turns the internal components which generate electricity. So the faster you can spin the turbine, the more power you can get. And the slower, you might get a little less power. And so what manufacturers will typically tell you is, you know, how much power it's rated for at a maximum wind speed. And then they'll often, I think, also tell you about how much energy you can expect based on an average wind speed, maybe over the course of a month. So when you go to site a small wind turbine, your installer will typically come out and measure the wind using what's called an anemometer, a wind measurer, essentially. And they'll measure your wind for a little while and get a sense of kind of what your average wind speeds are. And that'll factor into how much power you can expect to get. You can also download wind data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the NOAA.gov website. They have data there available as well. For micro hydro, I think Montanans are probably familiar with the concept of hydro, especially being in the Pacific Northwest. A lot of our power comes from hydro, especially in Western Montana. Micro hydro is considered anything less than about 100 kilowatts of capacity. And the way you get power from micro hydro, well, actually is also spinning a turbine just like wind, but instead of using wind, we're using water, but it's the same principle, same concept. And you can see one of those turbines in that bottom right picture there. That golden nozzle is where the water comes in and it flushes right into those cups, which spins the generator, and that's how you get electricity. That picture in the top right is a picture of a micro hydro system that MREA actually did a virtual tour of this past summer. So we have a whole YouTube video about micro hydro that you can watch if you want to learn more. And the picture in the bottom left is kind of a very simplified explanation of how micro hydro works. That second line of text there I have, it says power function of flow rate and head. And essentially the power you're getting out of a micro hydro system is how fast the water is moving and how much kind of pressure you have in the system. And pressure is often measured by the distance that you're traveling, you know, the size of the pipe. There's a couple different kind of engineering or you know, physics calculations that go in there. But the long and short of it is you're looking for a head drop. It's a physical distance you're measuring in feet. So you can see on the screen here, there's this little reservoir. There's a diversion and a little reservoir of water, and it's flowing downhill through a pipe into the micro hydro generator system. Most of the water, if not all of the water, actually flows back into the creek, and then energy obviously is produced and comes out. So those are your basics. And you know, some of the big considerations if you're thinking about micro hydro, obviously you have to have access to water. So that can either be in stream, or that can be still water as well. But you need to make sure that you have water rights. That's a really big consideration. And for micro hydro, that's normally the thing that takes the longest in the installation. So you need to check with DNRC, unless you already are good and know that you have the rights. But otherwise, you'll have to check with DNRC and just give them a call and talk through and make sure that everything you're doing is good to go. And the other consideration for micro hydro is just seasonal flow changes. As we know in Montana, flows sometimes depend on snowpack. And there are certain situations where you might have enough flow year round where it doesn't, the seasonal flow might not matter that much. And then in some cases, obviously there are creeks that just run dry over the winter or the summer, whatever it is. So you'll have to kind of factor that into your equation as well. Again, all of this is stuff that your installer will absolutely be able to go over with you and in much more detail, and then connect it directly to how much power you can be producing. So we always recommend asking your installer any questions that you have as well. That's all I'm going to share about the actual systems themselves. But again, we do have a YouTube video about micro hydro that I think might be really helpful for folks to check out. So I'll talk more about that at the end. Now I want to go over a couple of financing and incentive options for folks that you should know about. The first and foremost and the biggest one is there's a federal tax credit that you can get if you install alternative energy systems at your home or business. For right now, for 2021, that credit is at 26%. It was actually supposed to step down this year to 22%, but Congress actually passed a 2-year extension last year in I think November or October of last year, which was great. And that was a lot of lobbying from national groups, and especially during kind of an economic downturn, it's nice to have that tax credit available for another couple of years at that level. In 2023, it'll step down to 22%. And then in 2024, it actually goes away for residential customers and sticks around for commercial customers at 10%. And that's in perpetuity. So what is that to say? Now is a great time to go solar because you can get about a quarter knocked off the price from the federal tax credit, which is great. Some other incentives you should know about, there's also a state tax credit. It's $500 per individual. You can claim up to $1,000 per household. That's from the state of Montana. There's also kind of grants and loan options. So if you're a commercial individual for agriculture and other small businesses, you can apply for a grant from the US Department of Agriculture called the Rural Energy for America program, or a REAP grant. And you can get up to 25% of the cost of the project, which is pretty great. And if you do energy efficiency, they also have grants for that as well. So USDA is a great resource. And I think other than maybe Billings and maybe Great Falls, I think all of Montana is considered rural according to USDA's federal guidelines. So you probably qualify on that front. There might be other qualifications to consider, but we're all pretty rural out here compared to the rest of the country, for better or for worse, maybe. And then there are some loan options. There's one from the state, which a lot of folks use. It's called the Alternative Energy Revolving Loan Program. You can get up to $40,000. It's about 3.25%. Yeah, it's a great product. I know a lot of people across the state use it. There's also another kind of local-ish option to the Bitterroot. Up in Missoula Clearwater Credit Union, they offer home solar loans up to $25,000 and 3.9%. And those percentages are similar. They're obviously a little different and similar, but the different fees between those two different loans and some of the other considerations actually make them quite comparable. So I always recommend checking out both just to see which might work better for you. So it's worth looking into all these different options, obviously, because that can help finance your system. Another thing I want to talk about, and this is a little bit more on the policy side, but definitely something that should factor into your decision. It's what's called net metering. And net metering is a billing mechanism. And what it means is if you install any kind of alternative energy system, so solar, small wind, micro hydro, if your you know, typically you size your system to offset your energy needs, right, and nothing more. But if your system happens to be producing more at any given time than your home or your business is using, so if you have excess energy, through net metering programs, that energy is allowed to flow back onto the grid, and it'll flow to your neighbors for them to use. And you get a bill credit under your bill for that energy. The utility gets to sell that energy to the other customer, and your customer gets to use that energy. So, or your neighbor rather gets to use that energy. For Northwestern Energy customers, the credit, the value of the bill credit that you get is the same as what you pay for energy. So it's a one-for-one swap. Some co-ops around the state, most of the co-ops also have a one-to-one swap. Some of them don't, so it's good to check in. I forget what Rivali's is, so Dan, you'll have to correct me maybe when you do yours. I think it's a little lower, right? Yeah. So it is a little lower. And again, that's for energy exported to the grid. If you're using energy just at home, just to offset your own energy needs, you know, no utility touches that, nor should they, right? That's yours to use and use on site. But it's an important concept, and net metering can get a little wonky. That's most of what I fight about up here at the legislature, to be honest. But if you want more information, this diagram and some handouts about it are available on our website as well at that link at the bottom there. That's all I have, but I'm happy to answer a lot of questions. I want to go through just a couple of quick things here. Our website is montanarenewables.org. It looks like this, and I'll just point you to a couple places that I mentioned. That the two at the top is the installer directory, and then that Learn tab has a ton of web pages about all of these different things that we're going to talk about tonight: micro hydro, solar, small wind. So there's plenty more information that you can learn there. And then I did mention our YouTube channel. I'm really excited about this because we just launched it like a month or two ago. But we have a whole bunch of videos about just educational issues about renewable energy in Montana. One of the ones down here in this renewable energy basics section towards the bottom is about micro hydro, which I mentioned. There's another about off-grid storage, which might be of interest. And the third one is about solar PV, featuring none other than Mr. Dan Brandborg himself. So that's another great resource for folks to check out. And I hope you'll look into those. And if you do, I never thought I would end up saying this, but if you do, please subscribe to our YouTube page, because if we get 100 subscribers, we can change the URL link. Right now, it's a bunch of numbers and letters, and I'd love for it to just be youtube.com/Montana Renewables. So help us out by subscribing. And I'll end with just a thank you and a beautiful picture of the Darby Library Solar Project down the Bitterroot. So with that, I'll stop sharing screen and pass it back to Kit.
Your sound is off, Kit. You want me to just go? I'll just go. I think that's what I'm reading lips of. I'm pretty good at reading lips. So I'm Dan Brandborg, and thanks for having me. It's fun. I think I know half the people on the Zoom, or a number of systems, and some folks that are going to have some systems installed this year. So I started in photovoltaics with a manufacturer back east. And saw that we were, most of our sales were in the Western US, so it was easy to come back and do solar here. When we started with mail order, we started working with the three sources that Andrew mentioned, micro hydro, small wind, and solar. And quickly we morphed into just purely solar because of the site restrictions, the water rights on the micro hydro, the wind in the valley. I think one of my examples I use is the Forest Service lookouts. What do they use for power? They use a solar module, a number of solar modules, a wind generator. As fun as it is and as cool as it is, it's moving parts. And one of the big advantages of PV photovoltaics is no moving parts, or very few moving parts when you include the whole system. So, and then always want to plug house efficiency. You know, this is about the more efficient your home is, your business is, the less of a solar system it takes to run it, the less cost. Kit asked me to mention heat pumps. I know enough about heat pumps to be dangerous, but yet they're a great thing to combine. We did a net zero home in Stevensville for Habitat, I think 8-9 years ago. And the only way we could pull that off is with a heat pump for heating and cooling. And the heat pumps have gotten so much better over the last 5 years. So if you've looked into heat pumps years ago, look again. The air source heat pumps, which are much less expensive because we're just taking the ambient air and using that. The mini splits they're called. Just a great way to go. You can just, if you look at the BTU use of a heat pump versus a gas appliance, you will cut the BTU amount by 2/3. So a heat pump will bring you that electric bill. Let's put it this way, if you went from electric resistive heat to a heat pump, you would cut your kilowatt hour consumption by 2/3. I use a heat pump here. Becky and I use a heat pump that's a ground source. Actually, it's a water source. So air source, and then there's groundwater, which is really fun. You need to put tubing in the ground to bring that temperature, 45, 50 degrees consistent down 8 feet or so in a Bitterroot, or well is another source of well water. So yeah, that's it's a great way to go. It's just, can't say enough about it. Because years ago when we started, we wouldn't take on any heating loads. Nowadays, when we started, we worked with 30-watt solar modules. Now we're working with 350, 400-watt solar modules. They are bigger, but they're much more efficient. And we know the cost is just dropped dramatically to where it's really viable compared to in the past, we just were remote homes and such. But that's been going a while. I can get into history too much. So just moving on here. So the majority of systems are grid tied that we're doing. That, like Andrew explained, the net metering process is pretty cool in that what we can do is store that summer sunshine. Other solar means, I started in solar thermal, we can't store thermal energy into the winter without a lot of work. And it's still, I don't think we could get through the winter months. So net metering allows us to store our summer, spring, fall sunshine for winter use. And the other thing about net metering, it's 100% efficient. Every kilowatt hour you send back in, you're getting 100%. Battery, and we'll talk more about batteries, we're never at 100%. We're getting better. We're in the 90s now on battery efficiency conversion. But again, net metering really, really allows us really what made solar take off in the U.S. And started in Europe and came this direction. So Andrew talked about the bidirectional meter. So the first thing we're doing is powering the loads in our home. Call that self-consumption. So when you're during the solar day, any load you have on the house is being powered by your solar array. Depending on the size of the load versus the array. But you're not going back in the meter. You're using that power right on site. A great example of that would be to charge an electric car during the solar day. You're not going back in the meter. That's coming right off your array, right into those batteries, which is pretty cool to be driving around with solar electrons. The self-consumption is pretty important. So we have the two different utilities, Northwest Energy, as Andrew points out, Montana Power, they took the center of the valley, more dense population. They're at about 12 cents a kilowatt hour for residential systems. It depends on your power bill, and we talk about your power bill. what I do is that power bill is one of the first steps is to look at how much power you use on an annual basis. So the Northwest Energy bill has a bar graph up in the upper left-hand corner, which just illustrates the last 12 months of use. And there's what really helps size a system. We don't want to make more power than what you'd use in a year's time, or the utilities will just take that power from us, sell it to the neighbor, not reimburse us. So our job is to undersize the system to your loads, in a nutshell. So we have Northwestern, then we got Ravalli Electric Co-op, which unfortunately makes Northwest Energy look like good guys sometimes. They are at 8 cents a kilowatt, Bonneville power, mostly hydropower coming from the Columbia. But a few years ago, we really campaigned against it, but they said anybody sending power back into the grid on the co-op is at 4 cents a kilowatt hour. They grandfathered in people that were already in the system, and that is something, there's another advantage there about grandfathering. We see people wanting to change things, legislature and such. Typically, if you're in, you're in. You signed a contract with utility, so they don't want to have a breach of contract with you. So grandfathering to us is kind of a way to get in before something would change the wrong direction. Moving right along. So a typical system we install is the grid interactive. We have, 3 main components. We have the solar array, something to hold the solar array on the ground or on the roof, and an inverter, which takes the solar DC power, converts it to AC 240 like we use in our homes. Really simple, really straightforward. Very popular, keeps the cost down. Let's see, we covered all that. Andrew covered this. And then, so let's go to the disadvantage of a grid-tied system. Is number one is power goes, the electric utility goes down, so do you. The inverters are designed, the grid-tied inverters are designed to shut down to protect the line. That's how we got these inverters accepted by the utilities in the US, is that we're going to shut down, protect that lineman. If we were to energize that line, lineman would be working on something. Once that goes through a transformer, goes up to 6,000 plus volts, lethal. So we just don't want to do that. And that's our big disadvantage. And boy, after Texas and such and all the happenings down there, the interest in battery storage has just gone through the roof. We're going that direction, but it's been a big shot in the arm for batteries. So batteries take that, give us that ability. Some kind of storage of that electricity, give us the ability to power during an outage and use our solar power during an outage. It adds components, it adds complexity, it adds cost. So it's, because of the cost, batteries, let's talk about batteries today. So we've been using lead acid batteries for decades. They're actually developed in 1860s. And lead acid has not really changed that much, but so we're still using that with Rowan Homes. It's low cost compared to lithium, the lithium world of batteries, which is taking over. So many advantages of lithium, sealed, never needs watering, incredible cycle life, decades of cycle life, versus a lead acid battery, which needs to be replaced pretty frequently. So we can talk a lot about batteries. I don't want to go too deep into them. We can talk quite a bit on the lithium batteries, everything that's going on. What we're looking at, we've got a couple of fun things going on with lithium batteries. They're so advantageous. The big negative is cost, but the cost is coming down. The mass production is increasing dramatically. Unfortunately, electric vehicles are taking all the supply of lithium batteries at this point. We thought, I put in a lithium battery in my place to experiment with it 3 years ago. And at that time, we thought, boy, we're going to see major reductions. And we really haven't. It's fun to look at the internet and you'll see these amazingly low costs for lithium batteries. Well, that's when you look at a vehicle with the lithium batteries included. And that's where the costs are coming down. So we have the battery that I have in my home is a 10 kilowatt hour battery. Just for example, I run a Tesla. I just bought one 6 months ago and have a lot of fun with that. That battery is 80 kilowatt hours, so 8 times the size. So you go, well, wow, there's a great battery sitting out there. How could I integrate that with my solar system? And that's where we're going. And we're going there slowly, but I think the future will be where we can plug in our vehicle. And then a power outage, we've got a nice battery bank to utilize during an outage. So I guess at that, I just turn it over to questions. I've covered everything, but I'm sure I forgot a few things. So Andrew or Kit, keep me online.
Okay, now I can unmute myself. There are quite a few questions already posted. The first one is there any hope that, for either of you, is there any hope that the federal tax credit will be extended? Maybe Andrew.
Yeah, I can jump in there. Extended past 2023 or 2024. It's hard to say. I think there's hope. The current administration that we have has signaled a lot of interest in supporting renewable energy development. The tax credit was nearly phased out altogether back in 2018 or 2017? I think it was 2018 it was supposed to phase out, and they extended it in 2017, I think is when what happened. But in any case, it's been extended before. So we'll see. I mean, I'd love to, this is going to sound weird coming from an energy advocate. I'd love for the costs and everything and the technology to get to the point where, we don't have to care about tax credits anymore because it's just that affordable. And we're getting closer and closer each day. But, right now these credits are still driving a lot of growth and they're helping a lot of people save money. So I'm hoping they'll stick around for a while.
A second question is, what bills at the legislature should we be concerned about this session?
I think that's for me, but Dan, do you want to take that one?
Andrew made a huge push on a terrible bill that was introduced. So this is a fun time to congratulate him. We had 1,300 comments to Helena saying, don't do that. And Andrew led the charge over there, and this rascal dropped the bill. But every session Andrew has something to do. He's got a good job security there.
Yeah, there are always a number of bills that we're watching out on. It's a little frustrating sometimes because we feel like all we're doing is playing defense, which is a shame. And I think it's not as fun, but is critically important. So there was that House Bill 359, which we were able to kill. We're past transmittal deadline. We're past the halfway point in the session, which means that there won't be many new bills. Mostly the landscape is for the most part set. But now we have to be careful for amendments and things like that people tack onto other bills. So there's a couple good bills that we're tracking that unfortunately might get amended and kind of change the nature of the bill. So we're always keeping an eye out on that. There's a lot of stuff going on right now with the renewable portfolio standard. There's a lot of bills going on right now with taxation of renewable energy and trying to figure out what to do there. And not all of those taxation bills are bad. I think the state and legislators are trying to figure out what to do with all this new renewable energy, large scale stuff, not small scale, but large scale stuff coming on the system, and how the state can better benefit from it. And the tough challenge they have is, you know, figuring out tax policy that doesn't accidentally kill projects, because then you don't get any benefit, right? Right now, the state and counties are at least getting some benefit. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. There's a lot of nuance to it. If you're interested in tracking more closely, I recommend signing up for our mailing list. We send out legislative action alerts, as do a number of the other kind of advocacy groups in the state, especially those with kind of more of a lobbying presence. Yeah.
So the next item is more of a comment about Northwest Energy. At the end of every year, if you produce excess power, then Northwest Energy takes that and you start again at zero to be producing your power. And I think that this is something that people don't like, but I also see a bright side to that, which is that means Northwest Energy doesn't need to produce quite as much power from coal-fired plants. But does either of you have something to say about this particular comment?
Well, other states got better programs, better policies, utilities that are much more renewable oriented that will let's put in a community solar system for folks that have a lot of shade on their house. A variety of ways to integrate solar. Northwestern is definitely not the most progressive. So, you know, we, like Andrew said, instead of being on defense, wouldn't it be great to be on the offense and saying, hey, let's get this going. Let's expand this ability for renewables, but we're more in a defense posture, trying to just maintain what we have. You look at Oregon, Washington, California, it's just amazing the programs they have that would take extra power if we did want to become a power producer, where they would send you money. So hopefully that's in the future.
Yeah, and Kit, maybe I'll just add two things there. We've tried in the past to get bills moving that would, for example, roll over those credits into a low-income, weatherization or low-income energy assistance program. And unfortunately, all that stuff has died at the legislature. There wasn't much interest in it, which is really unfortunate. The other thing I'll mention, more towards people who are thinking of installing solar, is you get to pick the date for that 12-month cycle. It's something you can't get around. It's just part of installing your system. So what you can do is pick the correct date that's going to help you to make sure you keep as many of those credits as you can. So we always recommend picking the April 1st true up date. That way you can store up credits over the summer and use them over the winter. And you won't lose as much excess in the spring.
The next question I see is, are the educational programs targeted for public schools, and who delivers the educational programs? I guess that's addressed to you, Andrew, also.
Yeah, I deliver them. Up until 2 weeks ago, I was MREA's only employee. I'm excited we just brought on somebody half-time to help us with a lot of our programming. So I design and deliver those programs. And as far as who we target, really anybody who's willing to listen. We are age agnostic. We will come speak to anybody who wants to talk about renewable energy. So we've done presentations in elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, colleges, communities, you name it. So if you're interested in working with us on something like that, we'd be happy to hear from you.
Well, and I guess I have a question, which is if there, I don't think that there's ever going to be a way to have a personal solar powered project where you can be off grid without a generator because of the battery storage issue. But is that is something along those lines a possibility in the future, or some way to get away completely from having a fossil fuel generator and still be off grid?
Well, it's a great question, and yes, in the future. Right now, no, we need a fossil fuel generator. In our dark months, December, January, where we can just have, no power production from a solar array. We need that second source. The future is fun in that, I mean, as soon as I could get my farm off the grid, I'll be doing it. I have a distaste for the co-op at this point. Great people in the field to work with, but management, I could leave those. Anyway, what about electrolysis with our solar power to generate hydrogen, green hydrogen, not natural gas hydrogen, in a hydrogen fuel cell or a generator. So those are down the road. So not right now can we see doing anything that would really give, consistent power. But in the future, we're going to go there. We're going to get there.
That's all the questions that I see in the chat right now. Does anybody want to enter an additional question or put your hand up and speak? Peter might be able to unmute you, or if not, I think we should thank these two experts for coming to talk to us over the computer and for giving us some hope that renewable energy can be in the future of more of the people in the Bitterroot Valley and the rest of Montana, of course, and the rest of the world. Thank you very much. Oh, wait, here's a question. This is a tough one. What answers do you have for people who argue that there are adverse impacts in sourcing materials for renewables?
Oh, I think we could both talk about that. I'm sure Andrew's got some thoughts, but the letter to the editor, a couple of those that came out after folks' good talk. Dan Hedges, showed so much of a misunderstanding, misinformation, bringing up how toxic solar modules are, mining issues. Every one of those we can refute with real data. Yes, it takes energy to make a solar module. A solar module makes as much energy as it would take to produce it in a year or so, depending on where it's placed on the planet. So compared to many other sources of power, it's just a huge step in the right direction. So cadmium telluride was brought up as a toxic, which is, we've never dealt with cadmium telluride. That's a thin film, a utility scale product. And the amount of cadmium in recycling those panels is definitely going to be part of the program. And you probably have a lot of good thoughts there too.
Yeah, just a couple things to add. It's one of those conversations where I feel like some of the arguments are sort of a mile wide but an inch deep. So are there impacts for generating a solar panel? Absolutely. I'm not gonna say no, just like Dan said, right? The answer isn't no, but that's not the full discussion. One of the great things, it says my connection is unstable.
Okay.
Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, you're doing good.
Okay, I'm getting some head nods. Okay, I was concerned the hotel internet kicked out on me, but we're good. What I was gonna say was, the best thing about renewable energy is that once you do build the panel or the turbine or whatever it is, your fuel is free, and there's no emissions from the generation. So that's what you're building towards, and especially just from an economic perspective, free fuel is huge, not only for our economy as a whole, but our national security, our reliability for the grid, our national security. Not having to deal with imports on fuel sources. So there are a lot of different reasons that renewable energy is a good thing in terms of impacts. And then the National Renewable Energy Lab and Lawrence Berkeley Lab and a lot of other researchers are looking right now into how to increase the efficiency of recycling all this stuff, including wind turbines and solar panels and all these things so that we can reuse them. So, you know, if you compare that to the environmental degradation you get from some of our kind of conventional sources, you know, if somebody wants to have the conversation, you have to have the complete conversation, not just kind of nitpicking that part of it, I think.
That reminds me of another point that those letter writers that Dan referred to brought up, which is about the impacts of wind turbines on birds and animal migration. Do you want to address those too?
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to the bird experts, it's not an issue, right? And it's because, I mean, again, this is one of those things that's a mile wide but an inch deep. If you put a wind turbine right in the middle of a big migratory pathway, sure, it might be an issue, but we don't. You know, nowadays you have to do studies and you have to cite the turbines that there aren't impacts. If there are impacts, they have to be minimized. I mean, even folks like the Audubon Society, you know, are working with wind developers, not against them. So, you know, I think the bird experts know that there are ways to mitigate those impacts and avoid them altogether as well. And it's, you know, it's funny the type of stuff you have to look into. I'll just share maybe a lighter anecdote. When I was in engineering school, one of my senior design project was siting an offshore wind farm. So we had to look at where this could go, and we had to do environmental impact studies. And one of the things we had to look into was migration patterns of lobsters. So when I tell you that they have to look at the fine details, they really have to look at all sorts of different impacts to things you might not have even ever thought of. Because it's important, you know, you want to minimize those impacts or of course, avoid them altogether if you can.
Did you have something, Dan?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think we're starting to hear some issues about lithium and lithium mining. You know, the recycling program of lithium is just getting started. It's a major concern, but there's some great companies, JB Straubel, Redwood Industries, they're recycling lithium batteries. The lithium that comes out of the recycling process is fine to use again in another battery. You have some rare earth minerals that, you know, we have cobalt that comes only from the Congo apparently, and not great, but we're also seeing workarounds where we're eliminating cobalt from a number of the lithium chemistries. So the idea, you know, if with time and with real excellent recycling programs, we would reduce the amount of mining of lithium, which is pretty cool, and that we could go that direction. So yeah, we're going to have environmental impacts, but all in all, much less.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it seems crazy that the renewable energy, the impacts of renewable energy are really compared in any way to the impacts of the petroleum industry, even though no industry is free from impacts. But anyway, that's my opinion, not being an expert.
Who was it? Neil deGrasse Tyson was saying, wish CO2 was purple when it came out of the tailpipe so we could see it and realize it's there, being invisible gas. And we just don't see it. But just sitting in traffic in Missoula the other day with vehicles running all around you, and the health, we know the health issues with burning fossil fuels. And so there's just no question about going in the right direction.
So I don't see any more questions. Anybody else have a question or are we ready to let these guys go? Thank yous, and thank yous. From me and from a number of people in the chat. And Peter, did you have anything further to say?
Just thank you. And if you're interested in seeing the video presentations of the other programs in this series, just go to bitterrootcag.org and look under the science tab. The lectures we've had over the last year are all there. Thank you guys very much for being with us tonight.
Thanks again.
Yeah.
Thank you.